In July 2020, the CEOs of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google sat before the United States Judiciary Committee for 5 full hours, answering questions about their market power. It was described in virtually every major newspaper as a landmark moment in the history of antitrust enforcement, the most powerful legislative body in the world calling to account the most powerful corporations on Earth. 4 men at a table, broadcast live. None of them faced any consequences. Not a fine, not a single regulatory outcome that changed the way any of those 4 companies operate today. Amazon still controls roughly 40% of American e-commerce. Apple still takes 30% of every transaction processed on its platform. Meta and Google still command over half of all digital advertising revenue on the planet. The hearing happened, and then nothing happened. And the reason isn't that they didn't do anything wrong. Congressional members produced documented, undeniable evidence of anti-competitive behavior throughout that entire hearing. The reason is something far more structural than wrongdoing. So here's the question that hearing actually raised. When the most powerful legislative body in the world calls the most powerful corporations on Earth and nothing changes, what does that actually tell us about who holds power? The answer is that corporate power operates on a ladder, 5 distinct levels. And at the level where those 4 companies operate, that congressional hearing was not a threat. It was theater. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why, and which companies operating right now have climbed high enough that no government on Earth has a reliable mechanism for holding them accountable. Now, before we get into the 5 levels, there is something important to understand about how this ladder actually works. Because the common assumption about corporate power is that it operates through corruption, backroom deals, executives with envelopes full of cash, politicians on a payroll. That assumption is wrong. Not because corruption doesn't exist, it does, but because it completely misidentifies the mechanism. The most sophisticated corporate power in history was not built through illegal bribery. It was built through entirely legal instruments, lobbying, regulatory appointments, structural financial architecture. The rules were not broken, they were engineered around. And that engineering happened right out in public, with documentation that is available to anyone willing to read it. That is what makes it so much more significant than simple corruption. Corruption can be prosecuted. Legal engineering cannot. So, let us start at the beginning. Every corporation starts here. Level 1. It's the most straightforward, and most companies never leave it. You follow the law as it is written. You pay your taxes in the jurisdictions where you operate. You answer to the regulatory agencies with jurisdiction over your industry. If you break a rule, you face the consequence. The external authority is real, and your compliance with it is genuine. The relationship between the company and the state at level 1 is what most people imagine all corporate regulation looks like. The government sets the rules, the company follows them, the regulator enforces them. Simple. And for the vast majority of companies operating on Earth right now, this is the complete picture. But a small number of companies begin to grow large enough that something shifts. Not through any single decision, not through any moment of deliberate corruption, but through the simple arithmetic of scale. When a company becomes large enough, it starts to represent something that regulators genuinely fear disrupting: jobs, tax revenue, economic stability. And the moment the regulator begins factoring those consequences into their enforcement decisions, the moment the calculation changes from what did they do to what happens if we act, the relationship between the company and the state has already begun to change. Level 2 is where a company transitions from following power to beginning to shape it. And this level is entirely legal. It is documented publicly. It is widely understood. And it is a level that most people who think about corporate power already know exists. This is lobbying. It is campaign finance. It is the funding of think tanks and research institutions that produce the policy analysis that regulators and legislators rely on to make decisions. It is the hiring of former government officials as consultants and advisors who bring their relationships, their institutional knowledge, and their access with them when they arrive. The scale of this at the top of the corporate world is genuinely staggering. In 2022 alone, corporations and their trade associations spent over $3.5 billion lobbying the federal government in the United States. That is roughly 7 times what labor unions, advocacy groups, and all other non-corporate interests combined spent in the same period. For every dollar being spent trying to constrain or reform corporate behavior, corporations were spending $7 shaping the environment in which that reform would have to operate. You see, most people understand Level 2 exists. What they don't fully appreciate is that Level 2 is not the mechanism that produces real power. Level 2 is the prerequisite. It is what positions a company for the transition to Level 3. And Level 3 is where everything actually changes. Level 3 has a name. It is called regulatory capture. It is documented in economic literature, referenced in congressional testimony, and acknowledged as a real phenomenon by the very agencies it describes. And it is the specific mechanism by which a corporation transitions from influencing regulation to effectively writing it. The primary tool of regulatory capture is the revolving door. And the revolving door works like this. A senior executive from a major financial institution leaves to take a senior position at the Treasury Department or the Federal Reserve. They serve in that role for several years, during which they shape policy in ways that reflect their deep institutional understanding of, and in many cases genuine sympathy for, the industry they came from. They then return to the private sector, typically at a higher level than when they left, carrying with them a network of relationships inside the regulatory apparatus that makes them extraordinarily valuable. Goldman Sachs is the most documented example of this in modern financial history. Hank Paulson, Goldman's CEO, became Treasury Secretary in 2006 and oversaw the government's response to the 2008 financial crisis, a response that ultimately preserved Goldman from the consequences of the exact risk behavior that caused the crisis. Gary Cohn, Goldman's president, became the director of the Economic Council and helped design a tax reform package that produced enormous benefits for financial institutions. Steven Mnuchin, a Goldman executive, served as Treasury Secretary for 4 years. This is not a conspiracy. These are public appointments documented in the congressional record, reported in the mainstream press at the time, and defended by both political parties as bringing valuable expertise to government. But here is what regulatory capture actually produces in practice. At Level 3, a company does not need to lobby for favorable regulation the way a Level 2 company does, because its former employees are writing the regulation. The company's interests are not represented in the regulatory process from the outside. They are embedded in it from the inside. And the result is a regulatory environment that the company helped shape, one in which the rules that were supposed to constrain it were written by people who spent their careers understanding exactly why those constraints should be limited. The pharmaceutical industry's relationship with the FDA follows the exact same architecture. The energy industry's relationship with the EPA follows the exact same architecture. The technology industry is currently building the exact same architecture around AI regulation. Level 3 is not exceptional. It is the standard operating model of the most powerful industries in every major economy on every earth, and most people have never even heard the name for what it is. Level 4 is where legal accountability stops functioning, not as a metaphor, as a documented policy position stated under oath before Congress. In 2013, Eric Holder, then the Attorney General of the United States, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee and said something that no Attorney General had ever said publicly before. He said that when financial institutions become so large and so interconnected that their prosecution could destabilize the national or global economy, it creates a situation where the Department Department of Justice finds it difficult to bring charges. That is the too big to jail doctrine, stated by the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States in a Senate hearing on the public record. To understand how this became official policy, you need to understand what happened to Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen was one of the 5 largest accounting firms in the world, 85,000 employees globally, clients on every continent, when the Department of Justice indicted it in 2002 for its role in the Enron accounting scandal. The indictment alone, not a conviction, just the formal charge, was enough to destroy the firm. Clients left immediately. The company collapsed within months. 85,000 people lost their jobs because the government had charged the company with a crime. The lesson the Department of Justice took from Arthur Andersen was not that they needed to be more careful with which cases they built. The lesson was that indicting a sufficiently large and interconnected firm produces economic consequences that the government itself cannot control. And the policy that followed from that lesson is the deferred prosecution agreement. The company admits to the conduct, pays a fine, avoids criminal charges entirely. HSBC laundered $881 million with the Sinaloa cartel. Deferred prosecution agreement. Fine worth 5 weeks of profit, no criminal charges. Wachovia Bank processed $378 billion in cartel funds between 2004 and 2007. Deferred prosecution agreement. Fine worth less than 2% of their annual profit, no criminal charges. Deutsche Bank ran a $10 billion scheme moving Russian capital out of the country in violation of anti-money laundering requirements. Fine. No criminal charges. At level 4, the size and systemic importance of a company has made criminal prosecution not a legal question, but a policy decision. And the policy decision has consistently been not to prosecute. And level 5 is the one that almost nobody discusses publicly, because discussing it seriously requires acknowledging something that is genuinely uncomfortable to acknowledge. At level 5, the corporation has become more structurally powerful than the governments that are supposed to regulate it. Not in the sense of armies or territory, more powerful in the only sense that matters at this scale of analysis. It can make decisions that affect hundreds of millions of people with no mechanism for democratic accountability, no external authority capable of reversing those decisions, and no single jurisdiction that can reliably reach it. Let me be specific about what this actually looks like in practice. Apple holds more cash and liquid securities on its balance sheet than the GDP of 2/3 of the countries on Earth. When Ireland agreed to give Apple a corporate tax rate of less than 1% in exchange for locating its European headquarters there, it was not a corruption scandal. It was a negotiation between 2 parties, one of which held the credible option to locate those operations somewhere else entirely. Ireland needed Apple's presence more than Apple needed Ireland's. That asymmetry, where the corporation holds a genuine option to relocate and the government does not have a genuine option to let it go, is what defines level 5 power. The leverage has inverted. Meta's platforms have more daily active users than the population of any country on Earth. The decisions Meta makes about what content is amplified, what is suppressed, and what is removed shape the political information environment of democracies around the world. And there is no international body, no court, no regulatory framework with actual jurisdiction over those decisions in any comprehensive sense. Governments have passed laws. Meta has paid fines, and the fundamental architecture of those decisions remains entirely within the company. Google controls what approximately 90% of the world's internet search queries return. The editorial judgment embedded in that algorithm, which sources are treated as authoritative, which results appear on the first page, and which information is effectively invisible to the people searching for it, shape how billions of people understand every topic they search for. There is no public record of precisely how those judgments are made. There is no appeal process available to anyone who believes they have been disadvantaged by them. There is no democratic check on a decision that influences the information environment of half the world. You see, what defines level 5 is not the presence of power, it is the absence of accountability. And what makes it categorically different from every level below it is that at level 5, accountability was not avoided or corrupted or lobbied away. It was never structurally present to begin with. The national regulatory frameworks built to govern corporations were designed for a world where companies operated primarily within single jurisdictions, where their assets were locatable and seizable, and where their executives were meaningfully subject to the laws of the countries they operated in. None of those assumptions reliably hold for a company operating across 100 countries, with hundreds of billions in offshore financial architecture, and the ability to restructure its legal presence in any jurisdiction within months. The government are not losing a battle they were winning. They are applying tools that were never designed to reach this. The thing that should genuinely stay with you after this is not outrage at the companies at level 5. That framing misses the point completely. The point is that the framework society built to hold corporations accountable, antitrust law, financial regulation, criminal liability, democratic oversight, were not dismantled through corruption. They were legally, methodically, and in most cases, publicly engineered around by the same institutions they were designed to constrain, using legal instruments, in congressional testimony, in public appointments reported in the mainstream press, with documentation that anyone could have read at the time. The Arthur Andersen precedent that produced a too big to jail doctrine is in the public record. The Goldman Sachs revolving door is documented appointment by appointment in the congressional record. Apple's Irish tax arrangement was the subject of a published European Commission investigation. The 2020 congressional hearing that produced nothing is available to watch in its entirety on YouTube. These are not secrets. They are documented facts that almost no one has assembled into a single coherent system. And that is what this investigation actually gives you. Not a reason to be angry at corporations, a structural framework for understanding why the mechanisms that were supposed to keep corporate power accountable have consistently failed, and why, given the architecture that produced that failure, it was always going to turn out this way. If you found this video interesting, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because there is a lot more to come. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. See you next time.